Hi, this is Andrea Kane, and I'm here with you for HSC 114 Medical Terminology, where we are studying the Language of Medicine, 12th edition by Davy Ellen Chabner. And we are now on week 12. How did that happen? We will be covering chapter 16 and 17 this week. This lecture video is over chapter 16, over the integumentary system, also known as skin. And you'll have a follow-up video on chapter 17 on the eye and ear next, but for now, we're going to focus on skin. If you take a look at your syllabus, under unit objectives 9.12.1 through 9.12.8, you will see what we are trying to cover this week, and it's pretty similar to our chapter goals, which are up here on the screen from the book, where we're going to look at the layers of the skin, the accessory structures associated with the skin. We're going to build medical words using the combining forms that are related to the specialty of dermatology, identify lesions, signs, and symptoms, and pathologic conditions that relate to the skin, and the lab tests, cover lab tests and clinical procedures that pertain to the skin, talk about relevant abbreviations, and make sure we know the medical terms in their proper contexts. So here we go. Your skin weighs 8 to 10 pounds. If you could take off all your skin and hold it in your hand, it would weigh 8 to 10 pounds. Hard to believe, isn't it? It covers 22 square feet in the average adult. So we all have about 22 square feet of skin. Amazing. Think about these things. What does our skin do? It provides a protective membrane. Keeps us safe, keeps all of our tissues underneath of our skin and organs and blood vessels and all of that safe. We have skin glands that lubricate and cool the skin. We have receptors for sensations to be able to feel, touch, sense temperature changes, sense pain, those types of things. And it helps us maintain our body temperatures through sweating and those types of things. All right, so producing sweat. We have sweat glands. They produce a watery secretion that evaporates and cools. We also produce sebum. We have sebaceous glands that produce an oily secretion that lubricates the skin and the hair. Our skin receives sensation, as I talked about a little bit ago, pain, temperature, pressure, touch. Those are all types of sensations that are gathered through our skin. And then our skin also does a process called thermoregulation, where it interprets messages from the heat center in the brain. Ooh, we're too hot, we need to cool off. Oh, we're too cold, we need to warm up. Those types of things. So what is the structure of our skin? Well, there are 3 layers to our skin. The topmost layer is your epidermis. That's the outermost. It's a thin cellular membrane. So if you're touching your skin right now, you are touching the epidermis. Underneath of that is a large layer called dermis. It has dense fibrous connective tissue in it and all sorts of other things, which we'll get to soon. Then you have your subcutaneous tissue. This is a thick, fat-containing tissue. This is beneath the dermis, and it's where the blood vessels like to hide. If you've ever heard of an injection being given sub-Q, it means a subcutaneous injection. It's into this, they're injecting whatever they are into this subcutaneous tissue level. Your epidermis also has 3 layers. There's a basal layer, a stratum corneum layer, and melanocytes. And let's see if we have a visual to go along with this. We do. All right. So let's get started. If you go over here, you can see this very tippy top layer here. It's pink with the edge running through it. That is your epidermis. That is that uppermost, outermost layer. Then you have this very large layer here in the middle called the dermis. And as you can see, there's a lot going on in here. There are nerve endings. There are sebaceous glands excreting that oily substance. You have hair follicles going on. You also have sweat glands that are excreting things. So there's a lot happening in this large dermis level. And then you get down here and you've got sort of a cushiony level. This is your subcutaneous level, and the yellow is meant to be fat cells. And mixed in with those fat cells are your blood vessels. Now, if we were to take a little tiny section out of the epidermis and dermis, what would we see? Well, we would see here on the top is, whoops, my computer has a mind of its own today. Sorry about that. The stratum corneum, right up here, this top layer, stratum cornea. If you ever have really, really dry skin and it starts to flake off, that's from that stratum corneum. Then underneath of there is a layer of keratinized or horny cells, and I think that's from the shape of those. And then you have your basal level, basal layer, and in that basal layer, you have these melanocytes. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those as we go on, and how they interact and what they do. But the layers here are for you to see. An accessory organ of the skin is your hair, and hair cells are filled with the hard protein keratin. So you have hair follicles that hold the shaft of the hair, and we looked at those right over here. See, here, down here, you have the hair follicle, and you've got a root there, but then you've got the follicle, and then the hair itself sits inside that follicle. On average, there are 5 million hairs on the body and 100,000 on the head. Melanocytes form at the root form the color. So your hair color is naturally determined by these little melanocytes here that are right down at the bottom of this hair follicle around the root of the hair. And we'll see another visual for that in just a minute. But anyway, these melanocytes, they are the ones that form the natural color of hair. They grow your hair grows about a ½ inch per month, and cutting does not affect the growth. So for those who like to get it all cut off, that's not going to encourage it to stop growing or to grow less quickly. And here's the visual I was talking about. As you look here at the bottom, you can see those melanocytes. They're at the base of the hair root, right there. And they determine the hair color. And then you've got the hair fiber coming up here. And this is all within the hair follicle. All right. Nails. Nails are also an accessory organ of skin. You have hard keratin plates that cover your toes and fingers. They're made up of a lunula, which is this portion over here that's very light colored. And then you have the cuticle right here, the skin that's right at the base of the nail. And then you have the perinechium. And this perinechium is around the nail plate. It's the skin right around the nail plate, perinechium. Well, let's talk about glands again, because remember, last week was the musculoskeletal chapter, but prior to that, we covered the endocrine system, and the endocrine system had lots and lots and lots of glands in it that we talked about. It had endocrine glands and exocrine glands. These glands that we're going to talk about, the sebaceous and sweat, are considered exocrine glands because they're secreting things to the outside of the body. So let's start with your sebaceous glands. These secrete an oily substance called sebum into the hair follicle, and it's ideally to lubricate it so that you don't have it, so that it's not too dry. Then you also have sweat glands, and these secrete into pores to moisten and cool the skin. You actually have two types of sweat glands. One are the apocrine, and those are in your groin and armpit areas, groin and axilla armpit areas. And then you have eccrine glands, the sweat glands, and those are throughout all of your body. And all of these are subject to bacterial growth, so that can be an issue with these glands as we talk about pathology. So what does it look like? Here we go. We've got the hair follicle here. And right here, we've got a sebaceous gland, and that's putting that oily substance in with the hair. But we also have, right next to that sebaceous gland, we have this apocrine sweat gland. And the apocrine sweat gland is also releasing things. And then you have an eccrine sweat gland over here on the side, and that's releasing it through a pore. So that just gives you some ideas of what that might look like. On to vocabulary. We have quite a few new words this week. Adipocyte, albino, apocrine sweat gland, basal layer, collagen, cuticle, dermis, eccrine sweat gland, epidermis, epithelium, hair follicle, integumentary system, keratin, lunula, melanin. And melanin is the pigment that's formed by those melanocytes, and you have melanin not only in your skin, but you have those melanocytes that are determining it for skin and hair. So it's just interesting how those melanocytes, how they can determine those colors. Perinechium, pore, sebaceous gland. Sebum, squamous epithelium, stratified. Stratum, with a plural of strata, stratum corneum, subcutaneous layer. Now we're on to combining forms, and remember our equation. It is root plus combining vowel equals combining form. So we have adipo, albino, causo, caudero, cutaneo, dermo. And watch out because you've got multiple ones for skin. Dermato, another one for skin. Diaphoro, erythemo, erythemato, two there that mean redness. Hydro, ichthyo, kerato, leuco, lipo, melano, myco, onycho. Phyto, pylo, pio, rithido, sebo, squamo, stiato, tricho, unguo, xantho, and zero. Which combining form refers to white? Well, we know right now it can't be John Doe because that's yellow. It can't be Milano because that is black. So that leaves you chloro and albino. I'm going to let you figure that out. Next one. Which combining form refers to the same color as John Doe? Well, we know John Doe is not erythro because that's red, so we can take that out. Cyano is blue. If you've ever heard of cyan colored ink, that is blue. So you're back to xantho and chloro was on the last one, so chloro can't mean the same thing. It'll be interesting to see what you come up with. Check your book or this next slide, because the next slide is all about the colors. And one of the things I want to point out to you is that there are multiple combining forms for this with the same meaning. So for instance, there's 2 here for white. There are 1, 2, 3 for yellow and 1 for tawny yellow. So watch out when you're learning your colors because there's multiple ones. All right, cutaneous lesions. What are some of the things that can happen with skin that you might run across? If you look in your book at page, and I had this looked up earlier, sorry, I flipped my book closed. That's what I get for tidying up my desk a little bit too soon. If you look in your book at page, but it's the next one here. Yes, Pages 624 to 625. 624 has all of these lesions listed as well as their meanings, and on 625 it has pictures to match. So you can take a look there and go through all of these, but I'll at least say them out loud in case you're wondering about pronunciation. So scab or crust, cyst, erosion, fissure, macule, nodule, papule, pustule, ulcer, vesicle, wheal. All right, so what is a sign and symptom that something might not be quite right with the integumentary system? Well, one thing is if you have hair where it normally grows and then it stops growing there. This is called alopecia. And alopecia is just one of those generic terms. It's the absence of hair where it normally grows. It does not mean that someone has male pattern baldness or something like that. It just means that hair normally grows there. It's not growing there, so it needs to be investigated further to figure out what it is. Because hair loss can happen after certain illnesses. It can happen if there's a nutritional or vitamin deficiency. It can happen after a severe infection. There's all sorts of things, not just something genetic. Ecchymosis. Has anyone ever had a bruise? It's called an ecchymosis. It is blue-purple marks on the skin. Petechia. Petechia are small pinpoint hemorrhages, and a lot of times you'll see this with a vitamin or nutritional deficiency. Petechia. Urticaria is an allergic reaction. This is also known as hives, and this is where you eat or drink or are exposed to something that causes an allergic reaction or even a medication, for example, and this is what it shows up with your skin. These little small wheels, for better word, is what it says, but it's just a reaction, allergic reaction. Acne. I think we've all maybe experienced a little bit of acne at some point in our lives. These are papular and pustular eruptions of the skin with increased production of the sebum. That awful sebum gets out of control. That sebaceous gland gets busy, it overproduces, it gets tangled up in the follicle, maybe with something, and then you end up with blackheads. And then a word for blackhead is comedo. Although I don't think anyone really finds blackheads funny when it comes down to it. Burns. These are injuries to tissue that are due to heat, chemical, electrical shock, lightning, or radiation. This example shows us a second-degree burn. If you've ever had a sunburn that has peeled, that's probably a first-degree burn. A third-degree burn typically involves skin grafts. It's very, very severe. Cellulitis. This is a diffuse acute infection of the skin. If you've ever heard someone say, well, I have cellulitis of the foot, that means the skin of the foot is severely infected with something either usually bacterial when you're talking about cellulitis. Eczema is also known as atopic dermatitis, and this is an inflammation of the skin with red papular or papule vesicle or papulovesicular lesions that are caused by an allergy. People can have eczema on their legs, on their arms, and on their scalp. They can have it all sorts of places, even on their back, on their face, and that sort of thing. It's some kind of allergy. Although what's been interesting to me is that some people with eczema have done better in tropical regions of the world where it doesn't seem to flare up nearly as often or nearly as badly. I'm not sure why that is the case, but that is an interesting sort of side note here to eczema. And also sometimes winter weather, with it being cold and dry, can cause eczema flare-ups as well. Xanthomatous Viral diseases. This is when you have a viral disease that causes a rash. And the example they give us here is rubella or the measles, that sometimes someone will develop a rash and it's a side effect of the virus that they're dealing with. Gangrene. This is the death of tissue with loss of blood supply. Often we hear about someone who had a wound, maybe on an arm or a leg, and they developed a gangrene and had to have an amputation. But the death of tissue without the loss of a blood supply also is known as necrosis, and you can have necrosis of like the large section of large bowel, or you can have necrosis somewhere else in the body. Anytime there's death of tissue due to loss of blood supply, there's going to be some type of necrosis or gangrene. Gangrene, though, is the term that's really more external, but it refers more to the outside rather than inside, I would say. Impetigo is a contagious pyoderma caused by staph or strep. So this is one of those that if you hear someone has impetigo, do not go visit because it is contagious. Psoriasis. This is recurrent chronic dermatosis with silver gray scales that itch. A lot of this happens on the scalp. But you can also have psoriasis in other places. Scabies are tiny parasitic mites, and they cause infectious pruritus, and oftentimes where you'll hear about this is people who live in very difficult living conditions, such as a homeless person will somehow develop these. And so if you work in an emergency department, a lot of times that's something to watch for to try and help the patient with. There are some medications that they can use to handle this infection. Scleroderma. This is a chronic progressive disease of the skin that hardens the connective tissue. Systemic lupus erythematosus. We studied this last week under the musculoskeletal system when we talked about joints and how it attacks the joints. But this also has a component in it where the collagen in the skin is attacked. And so that's why it's mentioned here as an abnormal skin condition. Urticaria hives, we just talked about that, an acute allergic reaction where you get those red round wheals, or, we just say hives, but there's a more clinical description, I guess, when you say wheals. Tinea. Tinea is an infection of the skin caused by a fungus. This is tinea corporis that you see here. And obviously it's going to require some type of medication or antifungal to relieve. Vitiligo is a loss of pigment in areas of the skin. Not really sure why this happens, but for some reason sometimes it does. There are benign skin neoplasms that can occur. And these are keratosis, where the epidermis becomes thickened, leukoplakia, where you have white thickened patches on your tongue or cheek, a nevus or a nevi, and that's a pigmented lesion. And then verruca are warts caused by a virus. We just talked a little bit about where someone could have a rash caused by a virus, but there are also times when a virus may cause warts, and that's also known as verruca. Then looking at cancerous skin neoplasms, there's basal cell carcinoma. This is a malignant tumor of the basal cell of the epidermis layer. Okay. And then squamous cell carcinoma is a malignant tumor of the squamous epithelial cells of the epidermis. Kaposi sarcoma, we talked a little bit about this several weeks back when we talked about the immune system and HIV as it transitions into AIDS. And one of the unfortunate conditions that patients with AIDS can develop is Kaposi sarcoma, where they get these neoplastic growths of these cutaneous nodules. They're malignant, they are vascular, so they're into the blood supply, and it's just a nasty, opportunistic type of cancer that attacks these people that are struggling with AIDS. And the immunity, that the lack of immunity that AIDS in and of itself causes. So it's just unfortunate. So what kind of lab tests look at skin? Well, there's all sorts of ways to biopsy skin and take a look at it for bacterial or fungal or those types of things. You can scrape, you can withdraw fluid or pus, you can actually do a biopsy and cut something out, all those types of things. That's curettage, scraping the lesion or cutting it out. There's also cryosurgery, where you destroy the tissue with sub-zero temperatures using liquid nitrogen. And the opposite, where you destroy tissue by burning it with an electric spark, is known as electrodesiccation. Clinical procedures also include Mohs surgery, which is removing very thin layers of growth underneath a microscope. And typically this is done with basal and squamous cell carcinoma. Skin biopsies, you can do a punch and shave to remove the skin for examination in the pathology lab. Skin tests, this is where you can test the reaction of the body to an allergen by using scratching or patch tests. And now we're on to abbreviations, and we have quite a few here. So you're going to want to notice these. Some are familiar, like biopsy, and SLE for systemic lupus erythematosus, but others are going to be new for you. Combining form, we have adipo, albino, caso, caudaro, cutaneo, dermato, diaphoro, erythemo, and erythemato. Sorry, I've got to get it out of my mouth today. It's all garbled up in there. Apologies, it's definitely a Monday. Hydro, ichthyo, or ichthyo. Sorry, ichthyo. Kerato, leuco, lipo, melano, myco, anico. Phyto, pylo, pio, rathido, sebo, squamo. Stiato, tricho, unguo, xantho, zero. That X is always pronounced as a Z for whatever strange reason. All right, some suffixes. Algia, derma, esis, lysis, os. Osis, us, plachioplasty, rhea. And that is it for the skin chapter. I will be back very shortly, and we will start on chapter 17. Thanks.